Hey, gear lovers! I'm Mike Baird. Welcome to another episode of Mike's Drum Cubby.
The Brothers Day Premiere 2000.
Hey, Cubbies! If this is your first time with us, the Cubby's all about this vast collection of gear I have, but the stuff I usually use the most. Also, additional stuff I've added to my collection, and new stuff I'm going to review that's not part of my collection, but maybe will be. Anyway, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button, give me a thumbs up, send me a comment. There'll also be a story at the end, so you're going to want to stay tuned for that. So let's get to it. Premiere 2000. Well, when I saw this drum, I realized, first of all, it takes this weird slotted drum key, which is really strange. So I got the drum, and I ordered a couple keys online, and they weren't cheap either. And then I thought to myself, why can't I change these tension rods out to regular ones? So I'd asked my tech, Chris Hoyer, hey, what about that? And he thought, I don't know. I don't think any of the newer rods will fit. Well, anyway, I found tension rods, and they work bitchin'. And the rest is history. So the drum is a 6.5 by 14 chrome over aluminum, and it's a 1970s drum. The earlier 60s ones were brass shells with chrome over. This drum was made famous really by Keith Moon at the time, and in the 80s they went to a steel shell instead of this aluminum. In later years they switched to regular lugs as well instead of that slotted key deal. Actually, one of the reasons Premiere at the time in the US wasn't more popular was because of that problem actually. 2000 kind of has its own deal. It doesn't sound like anything else I have in my collection. The only drag is parts. As you can see at the end, it's got this weird strainer and it's a double wide snare deal and it's kind of odd. But anyway, I got a couple sets, so it's not an issue. Great sounding drum, used it a bunch. So here's a close-up of the throw-off and the butt end, the lug, the logo, and then here's that weird tension rod. You can see it's slotted. And here's the snare mechanism I was talking about. And it's similar to like the Rogers Dynasonic in that it brings it up flat up against the snare head. It takes these special snares. It has eyelets at each one of these ends. Premiere 2000, low tuning. Okay, here we go. Premiere 2000 medium tuning. Premiere 2000 high tuning. Okay, we're back. Anybody want to guess the weight of the drum? 8 pounds, 6.9 ounces. Well, so here goes the story. So the story of how I got this drum started me off with, I was looking to make a prototype drum. Chris Hoyer and I were working on something together. And he had mentioned a drum that I might want to hear, which was a Premier wood drum that a friend of his had. Well, I drove down, I contacted this friend of his, great guy, went to his little studio, and he had this red sparkle wood Premier drum. And it was great, sounded great. There was something about it that was really cool. Problem is, it's a wood drum, it's old, they're not all the same. But anyway, it sent me down this rabbit hole to try to find a Premier drum. Well, in the search for a wood drum to mimic what I heard, this Premier 2000 came up, and I said, oh, I wonder how these sound. Well, it was on Craigslist, and the guy lived down near LAX, down near the beach. So I figured, I'll drive down there and hear what it sounds like. The guy didn't want that much money for it. I mean, I forgot what I paid, but it wasn't expensive. I got there, the guy was in this cool little kind of a duplex kind of thing, or I don't know, they call it a fourplex. I don't know, there's a bunch of little places all next to each other, really cool, like built in like the 40s or early 50s. Real small little place, but real cool. Anyway, he had the drum. I said, well, I'd like to hear it. And he goes, well, let's go out to the garage. So we go out to the garage. It's old school garage, wooden door, old wooden door. Very cool. We go in, he had a snare stand there. I hit the thing 4 or 5 times. I said, oh, I'll take it. And I walked off with it. Now, as you see it, it has extra holes. That's where the muffler was. I removed those. It's completely intact and was all original with the original lugs and everything. Tension rods with the screwdriver type slot. But there's also flaking on it, which is typical of those drums during that period. The chrome just flakes off. Doesn't change the sound of the drum. Just it's going to be hard to find if you go to look for one, to find one that's absolutely pristine, because they just do over time. They just start flaking. Well, anyway, so that's the story of how I got the drum. Now, when I mentioned Keith Moon, there's a story I have about me and Keith Moon. So back in the day, there was a studio, and it was right near Gold Star. And Gold Star was a famous wrecking crew place, and that was on Vine and Melrose. Well, this was just down the street a ways, and the studio was called Clover Studios. It was right next to a place called Drum City, which was a Pro Drum, competitor. And Pro Drum was just down the street on Vine. Well, I never really shot much, just to let you know, I never shot much at Drum City. For some reason, I never got along with those guys. I don't know why, but just never did. So Pro Drum was my place until Valley Drum, opened. I discovered Valley Drum. Then I would go back and forth, sometimes Valley Drum, sometimes Pro Drum, depending on where I was. Anyway, so this place, Clover Studios. Well, I worked a lot there, and the people I worked a lot with was Steve Cropper and Duck Dunn from Booker T and the MGs. And we did a lot of record projects together. And if you don't know Steve Cropper and Duck Dunn, they were in the Blues Brothers movies and, that kind of stuff. They're really very great musicians. And, of course, I worked with Booker T as well on keys, B3 player, fantastic B3 player. Great guys, great musicians. Anyway, so at this studio, the owner decided one time that he was going to do this radio broadcast of All Stars, and they were going to come in and set up all the microphones, and they were going to have all these people coming and going, and they were going to have me and Steve Cropper and Duck Dunn be the bassist for the house band. So that's what we did. And that's actually the first time I met Steve Perry was there. He had come in and we talked for a few minutes, whatever. I don't know that had a bearing on me getting the Journey gig later. It didn't, believe me. It was audition time for that one. That's a whole nother story. But anyway, great. It was a great tour. Great guys. Neil Sean, Jonathan Kane. Fantastic. Just fantastic group. Anyway, get back to the story. So they would have all these guests coming in. Well, one of the guests was The Who showed up. Now, at that time, The Who wasn't in the resurgence they are now. They were kind of like, who cares about them kind of deal. I hate to say that, but that was kind of the fact. And everybody's kind of gone through that vogue, except for maybe the Stones and a few other artists. But they were just kind of out of, okay. They had their fans, but they weren't like they were in recent years. And of course, Keith Moon was there. So the owner of the studio asked me, he said, hey, would you mind letting Keith sit in? Well, I was deathly afraid of that simply because I know he's a hard player. And he literally, I mean, I had a session the next day, and I didn't want my stuff to be trashed. That was my thinking at the time. So I said no. So Keith was giving me the evil eye the entire time I was there. Now, hindsight being 2020, what would it have mattered? I mean, he could have literally broken my drums down, and I could have fixed them somehow and gotten through the session the next day, although it was a big session I had. It was a double session. I forgot who it was from, but I remember it was so important. I was like, man, I'm glad I didn't let it mess up, because I wanted to use the same heads. I didn't want to have to start changing heads and, whatever. And believe it or not, back in those days, heads were really inconsistent. So, you'd have to, it was, you never knew what you got. You could change the snare drum head, and all of a sudden you get a head, and now the snare drum's not working, and now you're down. And it was, it wasn't great. Even though I've been a Remo and Dorsey forever. But now they've gotten way consistent and whatever. But I got to the point where I'd have to go to pro drum, and I'd have to pick out drum heads by hitting them, see the consistency. Anyway, and that was the same way with sticks too. Sticks, you'd have to roll them across the counter. They get these bulks in the sticks, whatever they were, and you'd have to roll them to find out and get all the warped ones out and pick the good ones. That's all changed now too. You don't have to deal with that anymore. All you young players got it made now compared to what it was. Well, anyway, so that's kind of my story with Keith Moon. Yeah, shoulda, coulda, woulda in hindsight, but whatever. Here we are. So we've come to the end of another episode of Mike's Drum Cubby. If you like the Cubby, hit the subscribe button. Give me a thumbs up. Send me a comment. And what do we say?
And that's it.
And we'll see you in a minute.